Okay, good afternoon and welcome to this hybrid meeting of the Policy and Resources Committee. I would remind all attendees that this meeting is being recorded and webcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. I've agreed the attendance of some members remotely and would remind all remote attendees to mute their microphones when not speaking. For any members of the public watching, please note that the public committee reports, including details of specific recommendations, are available on the Council's website. We'll start the agenda. Item 1, apologies and substitutes.
We have apologies for Councillor Wan, with Councillor Stewart attending as substitute.
Okay, thank you. And declarations of interest and statements of transparency. Councillor McLaren.
Yes, thank you, Convener. It's just a statement of transparency. I attended a meeting with the residents and local police at Manor Court regarding issues within the car park at the Mire. I listened to their concerns but made no comments.
Okay, thank you for that. Not seeing anyone else, so that's the one statement of transparency. Okay, moving on to item 3, the minutes. So we've got the previous meeting on the 28th of January and the Policy and Resources Grant Subcommittee on the 30th of January. Any comments on the minutes? Are they correct? Okay, thank you for that. Moving on to item 4, that's just flagging up that the public and press will be excluded when we move on to the exempt reports. That's items 11 to 19. Are we in agreement to that? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 5, the Capital Monitoring Report, and I'll hand over to Mr Lorimer.
Thank you, Convener. Good afternoon, members of the committee. This is the latest monitoring report on capital based on actual spend for the 10 months to the end of January and a projection for the remaining 2 months of the financial year. As is set out in Table 1, which is on page 11 of the combined papers, to the end of January we've spent just over 44 million on a gross basis and just over 39 million on a net basis. So that equates to 65% and 82% respectively of the gross and the net budgets. We're currently projecting an underspend for the year on both a gross and a net basis of just over £8 million. The majority of that has arisen following a reprofiling of the expected expenditure in relation to the Moneyfeith High School project. That project is still on programme and on budget, but the profile has changed. The overall projected underspend for the year is planned expenditure slipping from this year into next, rather than projects costing less. As is outlined in the report, as well as some slippage in expenditure on the high school project, we're also projecting some spend to slip on vehicle purchases, on land acquisition costs, and on some of the Tay Cities deal projects. In roads and transport, there's a projected overspend for the year on both a gross and a net basis, and the detail of that, the reasons for that, are outlined in the report. And then finally, by way of introduction, the slippage on the planned capital spending means we now expect to need to borrow about 8 million less to fund the capital programme than what we had initially budgeted for. And as always, Convener, happy to try and answer any questions the committee might have.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions for Mr Lorimer? Councillor Bell.
Thank you, that was really helpful. I just wondered if you could go into a little bit more detail around the reprofiling, what that actually means on the Moneyfeith campus. I understand it's certainly on track, but I just wondered where that difference comes from. Thanks.
Yeah, through you, Convener. Thanks, Councillor Bell. Yes, so it's on every project there's a profile from the contractor in terms of the work that they expect to progress and the spend profile that's expected to come from that. And there's been a bit of a change from the contractor in relation to the Moneyfeith High School project. That means some of the expenditure we'd expected to happen this year will now fall into next year. We do have Dave Smith on the call. Dave's team's managing the project if members want a bit more detail, but it's really just that the contractor's spend profile has altered somewhat, but I suppose the key message is the project is still on on programme and on budget.
We want to hear from the project manager, then would that be helpful?
I think that would be helpful, given that he's here.
Okay, Mr Smith, if we can hear from you and just give us a brief summary of where we are on the Moneyfield campus. Thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to come in and just explain a bit more detail. So as Mr Lorimer said, project is still on programme and on budget. Generally, the reprofiling is a resequencing of activities and some small changes to the programme. The main change of that is around about the completion of some internal partitions, which has just had a knock-on effect to follow-on trades. As was suggested, the prices and the costs are all still the same, but some of those activities which should have happened prior to the end of March 2025 now might be happening in April 2025, and that slippage in the value, maybe by sometimes just a matter of weeks, is the significant change to the actual costs that will be spent this financial year.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr Smith. Councillor Cruikshank.
Thank you. I'd like to ask if there have been any thoughts on building new schools, specifically merging Arbroath Academy and Arbroath High School. I know this has been mentioned previously.
I'm quite happy to pass that over to the Deputy Chief Executive to give you an answer to that one. It was certainly discussed in the last administration, and I'm pretty sure we came to a conclusion, but I'm sure Mrs McIntosh will give you an update on that.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Councillor Cruikshank. There are no plans. We are not working on looking at a merger of the two Arbroath secondary schools in this part of our review of the Learning Estate. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the clarification there. Any other questions for officers on capital monitoring? Not seeing any comments. Okay, don't see any comments. Okay, we're asked to review and scrutinise the various tables on this report. So we can agree to progress. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the revenue monitoring paper 6, and that's back to Mr Lorimer again.
Thank you again, Convener. Yeah, this is the equivalent report in relation to the revenue budget, again based on actual expend and income for the 10 months to the end of January and a projection for the final 2 months. As previously reported, most directorates of the Council are projecting to overspend this year once ring-fenced funding has been adjusted for, but the position has improved since the previous report, which was based on actual spend and income to the end of November. Section 7 of the report sets out proposed budget environments for the committee's approval today. These will come from the budget provision in corporate items, the heading for non-pay inflation issues and risks, and the application of that funding or those environments, if approved, would reduce the deficits that were projected in education, lifelong learning, HR and legal governance and change. The report highlights a headline projected underspend for the year of just under £3.7 million. However, that position is kind of masked to some extent because there are underspends on expenditure that is funded by ring-fence grants. And those funds can't be used for anything else. They will automatically carry forward into next year. So having adjusted for those, the net position on the budget on a kind of like-for-like basis is an overspend, a projected overspend of just over £300,000. So still an overspend projected, but that is much improved than where we were in the last version of this report that I brought to the committee. Paragraph 8.5 in the report gives a bit of an explanation as to what has changed since the previous report. Essentially, levels of confidence in the final position improve the further through the year we go. I think that's reflected in the figures in the report. One final thing to mention, which isn't in the report, is in relation to the projected position on the Angus Health and Social Care Integrated Joint Board. The latest projection for the board, which is in the report, is a projected underspend of £3.9 million. It is now likely that the board will pass back to the Council and NHS Tayside as funding partners some of that underspend before the end of this financial year. And if that is confirmed and that happens, the Council's overall position then will move from a projected deficit to one of surplus. Now, I wanted to specifically highlight that because when it comes to me reporting on the final outturn for financial year 24-25, assuming that pass-back of underspend comes through, the position will be materially different from what I am reporting in this paper today. So that's just an update in terms of the projected position that I thought was important to highlight to the committee convener. And again, happy to try and answer any questions.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Lorimer? Any comments? I don't see any comments. I would just want to reiterate Mr. Lorimer's comments that the financial position is a better position than we saw at the last meeting, and it's very pleasing to see that we've made some recovery in the potential yearly deficit that's now much lower than it was looking like a couple of months ago. So that's pleasing to see. Okay, we move on to we have to note the comments of the Renewal and Repair Fund. We need to agree the budget environments in Section 7, and we have to review and scrutinise the contents of the report. Is that all agreed? Okay, thanks very much. We stay on financial matters because we move on to item 7, which is non-domestic rates, empty property rates relief policy. And that is again Mr. Lorimer, and I think elected members did have a briefing on this a few weeks ago, if your memory stretches back to that. So over to Mr. Lorimer again.
Thanks again, Convener. Yeah, this report presents a proposed revised non-domestic rates empty property relief policy, a bit of a mouthful, for the committee's consideration, and follows on, as you say, Convener, from a briefing that was held in mid-January. Now, most aspects of non-domestic rates are subject to national arrangements, but decisions on empty property relief, that's relief from having to pay rates, is an area where since 2023 the Council has had local discretion to decide how much relief is granted based on the circumstances of the properties involved. Prior to 2023, empty property relief on non-domestic rates was set nationally. The policy was set nationally, so it was the same across Scotland. But this moved to local policy decisions from 1st of April 2023. Now, in December 2022, this committee agreed that for the initial 2-year period of the new arrangements, the Angus Council policy would mirror what had been in place with the existing national arrangements. So absolutely maintained what had been in place nationally in the first 2 years. Now, the cost of empty property relief under those devolved arrangements is now met by the Council. So any relief awarded, if it were to exceed the budget available, would be an additional cost to the Council. The Council is also a rate-paying organisation, so we also pay non-domestic rates on properties. So proposed changes that are in the policy before the committee today also affect the rates that are charged to the Council, albeit in net terms it's neutral because any additional costs would be offset by not having by the cost of the relief awarded. So it's a neutral position for the Council overall. Because of those circumstances on empty property relief, I should say. The current relief awarded, and obviously it changes regularly because of changes in those properties that are empty and seeking relief, but the current position is the relief awarded is using 94% of the budget available, and without changes, the expectation is for that budget to be exceeded within the next year or so. So it's important to bear in mind that the cost of relief has an impact on the Council's budget and ultimately is a cost to the public purse. Now, the report only recommends a couple of changes to the existing local policy in response to changes that have been applied in other local authority areas and in response to concerns about the rising cost of relief. The objectives from reviewing the existing policy are set out in paragraph 5.4 of the report. Those are mainly focused on trying to incentivise the use of empty property and, as I say, managing the cost of relief. Paragraph 5.6 of the report highlights the three main points to note in relation to the proposed new policy, the most significant being the proposal to limit the property relief on listed buildings to 6 months as compared to the current policy, which sees relief on such buildings provided on an indefinite basis. Relief on listed buildings makes up something like 28% of the number of cases of relief, but it takes up 52% of the value of the relief awarded. So the policy change in this area is an important one. Paragraph 6 sets out the transitional arrangements to avoid any cliff edge effects for any ratepayers. The proposed new policy also proposes to build in a discretion that gives us some flexibility to deal with specific or unusual circumstances. I think that's a helpful addition to the policy. Appendix A gives the kind of detailed wording, the technical aspects of it for approval. Appendix B provides a summary of what the proposed new policy is against the existing policy, and Appendix C provides a bit more information about how our new policy locally as proposed compares with those of neighbouring councils. Finally, Convener, I would flag that any policy change in this type of area, there will be winners and losers, and there are limitations in terms of how much of an incentive a change in non-domestic rates policy can be in incentivising property which is currently vacant to be brought back into use. We don't think any property should receive relief from non-domestic rates indefinitely, and our neighbouring councils have adopted a similar position on this. So a little bit of a lengthier introduction there, but it's I suppose quite a technical report, so hopefully that's been helpful, and again happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I think of a question from Councillor Beattie.
Thanks, Convener. Ian, how does this affect our common good funds? Because we've got some listed buildings that are sitting empty.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Beattie. There are, the list I have, I only clocked really one building that I thought was likely to be a common good, but the change would affect all ratepayers the same, so whether that's common good or Angus Council or a business or private individuals or whatever, there would be an impact there. What we're proposing in terms of the transitional arrangements is on listed buildings that there would be no cliff edge, so the first 6 months would be of next year, if the policy were approved, would be full relief, and only after the expiry of that 6 months, if the building was still vacant or empty, would the new policy kick in, and that would reduce down to 10%.
And just on that, sorry, would that be all classifications of listed building?
Yes. All buildings that on the valuation register are regarded as listed. There are other categories as is set out in the report, so it does very much depend on what classification each building is given. So I'm just trying to find my list here. So if it was a listed building with a rateable value of less than £1,700, that would continue to receive 100% relief.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. Mr Lorimer, my questions are along similar lines as Councillor Beattie's when it comes to the non-domestic rates for some of the common good assets. Now, I'm aware that obviously not all of the common goods areas have got properties to let or to lease, but for those that do, how are they marketed? Because obviously when a council building becomes empty, it's marketed through the various estate agents and whatnot. So how does it work with common goods? Does that fall to the council to advertise those to try and get them put back into use, or does that sort of go back to the common good? How does that work?
Yeah, it might be I need to bring in my colleague Mr Daly on this one, but I think that our general approach to managing common good assets and property is the same as what we do for council buildings. So if there was a vacant common good building, then we would seek to try and get that reused in some way, shape or form through advert or whatever, obviously with local member agreement. It wouldn't just sit there neglected and not have any action taken on it. Our estates team would look to get that building used in the same way as if it was a council building. Decisions on common good, though, I need to remind members, particularly around reuse or sale or even lease, are captured under the Community Empowerment Act, and the need to consult around that can build in additional timescales.
Are you happy with that response? Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, everyone fully understands the paper. That's good. Any comments? We'll just move on to the recommendations, which is one, to note the background of the proposed changes to the existing policy. Note the proposed transitional arrangements set out in section 6, and agree to adopt the revised empty property relief scheme as proposed in Appendix A, effective 1st of April 2025. Is that agreed? Okay, thank you for that. Move on to item 8, which is the Common Good Funds Revenue Budget 25-26 and provisional budgets for 26-27 and 27-28. And I'll hand over to Mr Daly for this item.
Thank you. The Common Good Fund Policy Guidelines and Administrative Procedures requires the setting of the annual Common Good Funds budget. Members are asked to approve the Common Good Fund budgets for 25-26 as outlined in Appendix 1 of the report, along with the 25-26 maintenance bids as detailed in Appendix 3 of the report. As part of the budget setting process, local elected members were consulted on the proposed maintenance budget bids, and their views are provided in Appendix 3 of the report. I would thank officers from our Assets, Environmental Services and Finance teams for their diligent work in preparing the maintenance schedules and budget volumes, and I would also thank the local elected members for their valuable input during the consultation process when setting the budgets and maintenance schedules. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on this report for Mr Daly? Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. On page 70, Appendix 2, I just want to clarify or just check something. For the gutter cleaning, for both Arbroath and Brechin, there's quite a substantial difference between those two prices. When I think about the Mechanics Institute building as a comparable size, I'd kind of say that's similarly kind of size as the Webster's Theatre, yet to have their gutters cleaned is £1,000 cheaper in Brechin than it is in Arbroath. So can you give us any information, any further information about that? Is it different contractors that are doing it, or is it not? Because if it comes to having the gutters cleaned in Forfar, then I'll be looking to go with the cheaper one of those two. Thank you.
Yeah, these are based on inspections carried out by our property inspectors, and stating obviously the nature of the guttering will vary. Sometimes it's more challenging in terms of scaffolding, for example, that's required, or access varies. I'm not familiar enough with those buildings to say for definite the reasons, but I do know that sometimes the quotations do differ for different reasons on that. The costs that are provided are an estimate, and I can assure you that only the actuals will be applied, and also I would assure you that in terms of how we select the contractor, it is in line with our framework contracts we have in place, so it will be the same approach taken regardless if it is Brechin or whether it is Forfar, Arbroath or anywhere else.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Don't see any questions. Any comments? Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, having visited the Montrose Splash Park, it's evident that more seating would most certainly be an advantage, given the volume of people that visit there during the summer months. However, I can't agree to over £4,000 being spent on what is effectively 2 wooden railway sleepers when there are alternatives out there. I feel we should be spending money more wisely, and I would like to move that we defer consideration of Project 2 on the Montrose Common Good bid. I'm happy to approve Project 1, but would like to see Project 2 deferred for further consideration, and ask that the Director provide detail on the benefits and disadvantages of the proposed seating versus the alternative lower priced option.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Stewart. Did you have a comment on that, Mr. Daly, or you know, in terms of why the decision was taken to specify the said seats?
Yes, and I could provide an initial response in terms of the advantages and disadvantages too. And I'm joined on the call by our service lead for the park service, and I would refer to him too, who's a bit more knowledgeable on the subject. The first thing I think I should point out is that these costs include the installation costs. So we do charge for our professional park services their labour and also materials in terms of applying that. So it's not purely just on the benches. And again, I'm sure my colleague Kevin Robertson could explain better, but the principle is that these are matching what's already there, shown to be in terms of the lifespan that they provide to be very sustainable. And rather than myself explain it further, I'll invite Kevin, if he could come in and just maybe expand upon what I've just said.
Okay, Kevin, if you could follow up on that, thanks.
Hi there, thanks for that, Graham. Just to explain, as Graham had already mentioned, the benches that we're proposing are a direct match for the benches already on site. It's a very heavy hardwood bench, quite expensive to purchase. It's not a cheap bench, but the benches that are on site have shown to weather really well. They've stood up to the climate and the actual facility itself at Seafront Splash. So our proposal would be to keep things as they are on site and replace like for like.
Can you just clarify, Kevin, how long the current benches have been in location?
The current benches at Seafront Splash have been in location since the splash was built, and that was around 1992.
So they've been there 33 years then, a third of a century. It's not a bad innings for a bench, I guess.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Any other comments on this one?
Am I coming back in, Convener?
Yeah, okay. On you go.
Thank you. Yeah, I visited the splash park this morning, and while I appreciate what you're saying in regards to the like-for-like bench, we also have benches within the same area manufactured by another company, and that was the alternative one. Now, the alternative bench does offer a 25-year warranty with it, and it's at a much reduced price. That was, the thinking behind why I felt we should go for an alternative option. But, my position still remains the same. I couldn't agree to £4,000. I would ask to move that we defer that for further investigation.
Well, I think normally in these cases, if the elected members are tied, we bring it to the committee, and I think that's what normally happens. So I'm proposing that that we approve this. That effectively is the motion. If you want to propose an amendment, you feel free to do that.
I don't think we're allowed to propose an amendment on this, and that's why I was asking we could have it deferred.
Thank you. Just to confirm, the amendment would be to defer this element of the report. So in terms of now, we would go to a vote whereby we have the motion to approve as the report stands, and the amendment that that's to be voted on would be your amendment, Councillor Stewart, to defer that element.
Okay, do we just want to put that to vote? Okay, is a seconder for my motion? Councillor Meehan. And a seconder for Councillor Stewart. Councillor Cruikshank is seconding.
The motion by Councillor Duff, seconded by Councillor Meehan, is to agree the recommendations as detailed in the report. The amendment by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Cruikshanks, is to defer Project 2 of the Montrose Common Good Fund as outlined in Appendix 3 of the report. Convener.
Motion.
Councillor Meehan.
Motion.
Councillor Beattie.
Motion.
Councillor Bell.
Motion.
Councillor.
Motion.
Motion.
Councillor Cruikshanks. Councillor Devine.
Motion.
Councillor Doran.
Amendment.
Councillor Gall.
Amendment.
Councillor Gregg.
Amendment.
Councillor MacDonald.
Motion.
Councillor McLaren.
Amendment.
Councillor Nicholl.
Amendment.
Councillor Speed.
Amendment.
And Councillor Stewart.
Amendment.
So we have 7 for the amendment, 7 for the motion and 8 for the amendment. The amendment is carried.
Okay, that's grand, so we'll defer that item. Are there any other comments on the paper at all? Okay, so we've got the recommendations here to note the audited common good revenue balances, note the estimated common good funds, approve the budgets, which we have done with the one exception, and approve the common good budgets for 26-27 and 27-28, 26-27 for Guthrie Park and the Mire Car Park, and note the common good provisional revenue budgets for 26-27, 27-28, and note the current 3-year asset maintenance schedule for the various common good properties. Is that agreed? Okay, we'll move on to item 9, which is the future of the miniature railway site at West Links Arbroath, and that's with Mr. Daly.
This report provides background on the long history of Kerr's miniature railway operating at the West Links Arbroath, its non-operation since October 2020 and the expiry of the current lease of the common good land. Following the consultation exercise, local elected members were asked for their views on 2 specific options, either to renew the lease or terminate it and explore potential or alternative uses for the site. Taking into account the consultation feedback and the views of the majority of local elected members, it is recommended that the committee agree to renew the lease for the miniature railway site at the West Links to Kerrs Miniature Railway. It should be noted that any lease would include conditions such as appropriate landlord break options to ensure the proposed works proceed. Further provisions would allow the Council to terminate the lease if the investment works outlined in the report do not commence within 12 months of the lease start date or are not completed by a mutually agreed deadline. These conditions align with the feedback that was received from the majority of the local elected members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Daly. Any questions for Mr. Daly on this one? Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. I'm not actually sure whether or not Mr. Daly will be able to answer this question, and it's a bit awkward at the same time because there's the little unwritten rule that we don't like to interfere with other people's common good, and it should be left to the members of that ward. Also, while I would like to see the Kerrs Miniature Railway coming back, I'm not sure what has fundamentally changed. I looked back through some of the press around the time, including a Facebook video from Mr. John Kerr explaining why they were shutting the site down due to dropping visitor numbers, and quite substantial drop in visitor numbers, and plans that they had to do other, when taking the trains and things away to be used on other sites. If that was the case, and that was the main reason why they closed down, because of lack of visit numbers, lack of input and various other bits and bobs, then what has changed to then make them think, well, actually, we could invest £150,000 into this, and it'd be spectacular? So I don't know, as I said, I don't know if you'll be able to answer that one. I think that's one for Kerrs Miniature Railways themselves, but so I'm hoping you'll be able to give us a bit more insight into it.
As you said, Councillor Gregg, I think it would really be for Kerrs to comment on their thinking around their business plan. But what I can say is that our estates team have engaged with Kerrs to confirm, double check that the interest and the commitment to the substantial amount of investment is there, and the communication we've received is that is very much the case. It is also the case that they've continued to pay the rental for the land and the years it hasn't been operating, which suggests a form of commitment, the fact that they've continued to pay the rental, and also that they're wishing to take on this long-term lease of the land. So there are already a financial commitment in terms of paying the rental, but obviously the feedback we received from the local members was a concern around entering into a long-term lease and the land lying vacant, which probably aligns with what you've just communicated, Councillor Gregg. And for that reason, as stated in my introduction, we are including the conditions within the lease that if we're not satisfied that there is the investment coming forward, that we will be ready to act. And I'm sure that the local members will be in touch with officers if it gets to the stage where there is absolutely no sign of anything happening, and we will have the means through the lease agreement to actually terminate it early.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Bell with a question.
Thank you. It might be legal that needs to reply to this, Graham. So under 5.1 on page 74, I understand that the length of the lease means that needs to be a disposal of common good property. But what happens if either party comes to a break clause, or at the end they don't want it after the 20 years? Does it then return to common good, or is it a piece of land that needs to go on the open market? I'd just like any further detail on that if possible, please. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bell. So yeah, it would, whilst being leased to another party, it would still belong to Angus Council and the common good. So at the end of that lease, whether it was through a break clause or at the natural end of the lease, it would revert back to the common good, and then would be determined, do we look for another tenant, do we use it by the council, or is it then disposed of? But yeah, that would be the position.
Okay, any other questions on this one? Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. Similar kind of lines to Councillor Bell's question there, and from experience in the Forfar ward where we had the tennis courts, where there was a possible cat going for that and it then fell apart and whatnot. If we were to agree this and to offer them the lease, and then it got to a point where the break clause was enacted and they vacated the site, if the option was to return it back to grass and park, as we've done here with the Crazy Golf and the old tennis courts, I presume would that then fall to the common good budget to cover the cost of that as well?
I would, and I welcome my legal colleagues coming to as well on this, but my understanding is that, yes, ultimately this is common good land, so any maintenance associated with this land will require common good budget to cover that. I would highlight that what was put forward was that rather just reinstating it as grassland, is that exploring alternative uses for the site. And it was brought forward through the consultation exercise. It was by one of the local members consulting with the Community Council, with the new town board and with the local members around some ideas in terms of how we make best use of what is a very, very popular visitor location in Arbroath. So I would just caution it by saying it wouldn't be certain that we would just reinstate it as grassland, similar to the example that you gave. But I suppose the answer to your question is that it does fall back for the common good to fund the maintenance costs.
Okay, I've got Councillor Cruikshank and then Councillor Bell.
Thanks, Convener. How does the new vehicle route compare to what it was previously? Is it the exact same?
I'm joined on the call by my colleague from our estates teams, Mandy Robinson, and I think she is more familiar with the route, because I know it was subject to some change due to work Network Rail carried out, but I would just invite Mandy to come in, Chair, if that's okay.
Yep. On you go, Mandy. Thank you.
Yeah, the current arrangement, the only difference in terms of the lease is the area of ground that is being leased is slightly reduced because of Network Rail works, but the proposed routes for the vehicles are entirely the same as they have been since the original lease.
So it's essentially, as far as the railway is concerned, unchanged piece of land. There's a bit less, but it allows the railway to run.
The actual railway, the other routes shown, which I think are in green and red, are for potential use for little miniature vehicles. I think in the past there was a little miniature fire engine or a little tractor that potentially used those routes, but it's not a permanent route as such, but it's a right to use it for little miniature vehicles if required.
Satisfied with that answer? And Councillor Bell.
Thanks for letting me have a second go here. There's mention of the £150,000 investment and the timing of the spend of that and the completion of that. I'm wondering if there's a deeper conversation around what success looks like following that investment, and how is it contributing to a sustainable model within the town that is adding value to the facilities in the vicinity. Thanks.
Who's that? I'm not sure who that question is best addressed by. You're basically asking about what's the investment going to achieve, and I'm not sure any of us can answer that question. Can you answer it, Mr. Daly?
I'll try my best, Chair. I think that really the point that you raised, we met and we discussed this with the local members. I know at least one member's in the chamber today, and I think that was really discussion around that, because I think when we sought the views of the local members, it was around just the issues you've raised there, the fact that it has been non-operational, about is this sustainable future, just balancing all of those things with what is, being committed, a commitment to develop, historically, a popular visitor attraction. So ultimately, it did come down to, the local members to express their views. And as said in the report, really the recommendation brings forward, takes cognizance of the views of the local members on this. And I know from discussions we held that I think it was challenging for the members just to balance everything. Some of the points you just raised, Councillor Bell, on that. So I would say that those things were considered, and I think they were part of the assessment undertaken by the members based on the discussions I held with them.
Okay.
Thank you. I'd just be keen to see it being used and not just being an expensive shed. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Speed, you have a question? Okay. There's no further questions. Everyone had enough questions on that. I don't see anybody else. On you go with a comment.
Yeah, thank you. As Mr Daly has said, our both elected members have been fully engaged with regards to this report. Convener, I think that we should go full steam ahead with this lease agreement. There is a break clause in there, which hopefully will put some members' minds at rest. But Kerrs Miniature Railway has been loved by many and has been a top day trip destination throughout the decades. Sorry to do it again, but hopefully this project does stay on track and the renewal is delivered on time, because I am absolutely sure that there will be many passengers queuing up to take a trip when it comes to the grand reopening. So, yeah, I suggest that we move to.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments? Councillor Cruikshank.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I'm delighted with this proposal, and I think we should go ahead with this investment, and we should welcome any external investment into a key tourism area in Angus. And all there is left to say is welcome back, Mr Kerr, and good luck.
Yeah, thank you. I probably should clarify that the investment is by Mr Kerr, not by us. So yes, Mr Kerr is going to make the investment. Any other comments? Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. It certainly sounds like the Arbroath members are happy to support this, and of course, as it's a common good item, I would defer to them. So I'm happy to support this and look forward to welcoming the railway back for however long that may be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think there was a little bit of concern for some elected members. I think that the paper has been slightly clarified, and it's clear that there's a couple of break clauses. There's obviously a break clause for rent, so that will be reviewed every 5 years. And if the investment doesn't materialise, then there will be that's a break clause, and that will break the contract. So it's over to Mr Kerr to invest the money to provide a future. And I'm not sure if I've got any railway terms to use. Otherwise, it will hit the buffers. I think that's probably the one I would use. But hopefully, it will steam on for many years. Because I remember when my family were young going there. So it is an asset to the seaside in Arbroath, and we would all wish it well. But obviously, Mr Kerr's got to run it and finance it, and that's really over to him. So if there's no further comments, we've been asked to agree the lease on the terms attached to Appendix 1, and note that the lease would incorporate conditions including appropriate landlord break options. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We'll move on now from Kerrs Miniature Railway to the Common Good Register for Monifieth. That is item 10, and that's over to Mrs Watson.
Thank you, Convener. This report seeks approval for the Council to consult on a draft register of common good properties for Monifieth. Although Monifieth is a former borough, historically no land or buildings has previously been identified as common good assets in Monifieth. Legal colleagues have undertaken detailed investigations to ensure that the register is robust and accurate. Through these investigations, it's been found that several areas of land and buildings should have been included as common good assets for Monifieth, as you'll recall was the case with Kirriemuir. The draft list for Monifieth is attached as Appendix 1 and outlines the investigations that led to these conclusions being made. Appendix 1 proposes transfer of several properties held on the general fund into a Monifieth common good. Of course, no such funds currently exist. If the consultative draft list is approved today, then following consultation will provide further details of the financial implications both for the general fund and a new Monifieth common good. And my colleague Marie Callender, who undertook some of the work on the register along with colleagues, is here to take any questions. Thank you.
Are there any questions from elected members? Councillor Dorn.
Thank you. So this will be moving to the consultation stage after this. In that consultation stage, will people be able to see all of the areas that have been looked at? If they've got any suggestions to make, further suggestions, can they include them on that? And also, will there be an overview of understanding what this means to people in Monifieth if these are to move into a common good? Thanks.
So there's 3 properties currently identified on our draft register. Members of the public will be asked to consult on those 3 and any other suggestions, anything they think that should be considered, that we've not considered, or if they have any comments on things that we have included that they feel shouldn't be included. So members will be, members and members of the public will be asked to give their views on the common good of Monifieth. The second part, I think, was about their understanding of what they were being asked to do. This report, along with an explanation, will be put on our Engage Angus website. It will also be put in notices, which will be available at both the Monifieth Library and the Monifieth Activity Centre. And what will happen is any comments that come into us where people have asked for clarification on points, they will come through to my team and we'll be able to get back to them on anything that they need any additional information or help with.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? Okay, any comments? Councillor Boyd.
Yes, it was just, I noticed that the Carnoustie will be the next one to be looked at. Thank you very much for that. I suppose this is the point in time to say, as I've said for now over 14 years, thank goodness we don't have much of a common good fund. But it's interesting, we spent around about 30 minutes debating common good funds that was running to a few pounds. And it's very nice for that Carnoustie's alternative common good fund is sitting in the millions. Thank you very much.
I guess the only comment from myself is there are no funds in the Monifieth Common Good Fund because it has just been created out of thin air effectively. And presumably any work done on those lands ideally should be paid for out of the Common Good Fund, and there is no Common Good Fund, therefore it will need to be paid out of the Council's general fund, including, I mean, obviously legal costs of the work would normally be borne by the Common Good Fund, but there isn't a Common Good Fund, so it's effectively being, could I use the word subsidised by the general fund? Is that correct state of affairs?
Yes, so certainly we are, given that properties have emerged from the investigations that have been undertaken both for Kirriemuir, it did already have a common good fund in Kirriemuir. Monifieth doesn't have a pot of money that's considered to be common good. So yes, there will be implications for the general fund and in the setting up of a common good fund for Monifieth, and that's what with finance colleagues we'll be working on to take back to committee with that information following the consultation, with the results of the consultation and more detail on that and the implications.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. So no further comments, don't see any. Okay, so on this one we are asked to note and approve the contents of the consultative draft list of land and buildings, approve that the consultative draft list is publicly consulted upon and duly published as required with legislation. Note that following the completion of the period for consultation and publicity, the Director of Legal, Governance and Change will bring a report back to committee on the representations received, and note the progress with compilation of and consultation on a publicly accessible register of common good property assets for the remaining Angus boroughs of Kirriemuir and Carnoustie. Is that all agreed? Okay, thank you for that. So we now move on to the exempt reports, and if we could perhaps stop the live stream.
Hi, John. Can you stop the live stream, please?